There's BBC Minute on World Service Radio. It is, as the name suggests, a minute, a bite-sized conversation of what's happening around the globe, updated every half hour, 24 hours a day. You may have seen on the BBC News channel, it also runs on World News, there's Outside Source. It's a real-time news broadcast from the heart of the BBC newsroom, but the thing that's key about it is it brings together the BBC's network of UK and international reporters with the latest news trends and feedback on Twitter, Facebook, other social media. We launched relatively recently BBC Shorts. They comprise 15-second short-form video news reports and go-figure information graphics. And it now has more than 300,000 followers on Instagram. There are going to be more and more changes to come. In tomorrow's world, to keep everyone informed, to fulfill the democratic purpose of the news, we will have to grasp both broadcasting to mass audiences and personalised services streaming to the individual. Data journalism will offer new means of holding public services, politicians and powerful organisations to account. We're going to have to think fast and slow, breaking news in quick snaps, and then at the same time, investigations, analysis, reporting that has the benefit of a lot of time and a lot more longer consideration. News that's going to work for big screens on your wall and the small ones in your hand. But I suppose as we head into the future, we shouldn't lose sight of the past. We shouldn't lose sight of what we're about. In 1958, as many of you will know, that great CBS newsman Ed Murrow made a famous speech to the Radio Television News Directors Association convention in Chicago. He said, and I'm sure you will know this well, television. Quote, "This instrument can teach, it can illuminate, yes, and it can even inspire. But it can do so only to the extent that humans are determined to use it to those ends. Otherwise, it is merely wires and lights in a box." His principle is still valid. The technology, the systems, the platforms matter hugely, perhaps more than ever. But they still don't matter as much as what we do with them. At the BBC, we aspire each day to do the best journalism in the world. That's it. And I know we make mistakes. We fall short. But while I'm here, I should just say, we do also sometimes deliver. If you get a chance, do take a look at Carrie Gracie's report this week on White Horse Village. It's an example of how you can tell a story, perhaps the most significant story of our times, the transformation of rural China and the economic revolution and what that has wrought both on the countryside, the landscape and the lives of Chinese people. And while I am, forgive me, tooting our horn, if you didn't see it, there was a piece of reporting from Yemen by Jeremy Bowen and a cameraman, Nick Millard, on the 10 o'clock news this week that I hope reminds us all why we get up in the morning and do this job. It is some of the best journalism in the world. But the point I guess I'd like to make at the end is that the job of the news is to keep everyone informed. It is to enable us to be better citizens, equipped with what we need to know. And in the exciting, uneven and noisy internet age, the need for news, accurate and fair, insightful and independent, is to my mind greater than ever. Journalism is still about that. It's still about the news. That's why today, Alistair Cook is still speaking to thousands of people. I think I feel, I mean, clearly I think that one of the things that's terrific about the BBC is that it is every day a very vigorous argument about the news, both inside the organisation as we discuss what should run, where it should run and how, but also on the airwaves. That's what the BBC does so well. You only need to tune into 5 Live or the Today programme. You only need to tune into what's going on air, and you can hear, I hope, real arguments about what's happening in the world and this country. I don't subscribe to that point of view. I think that you have to be ever vigilant about making sure that you're alive to, if you like, heretic voices. That's always really important in any news organisation, and you've got to make sure that you are thinking about at all times the other point of view, and it's difficult. It's difficult. Let's take an example at the moment. You know, how do you make sure that you cover what's happening in Ukraine in a way that's really alive to the humanitarian issues in Ukraine, but also trying to think about things and understand the Russian point of view? It's easy to get caught up in one point of view, particularly when it surrounds you. So I do think that's important, but I think that's true for all news organisations. And actually, I would stand back and I'd say, I've worked in a few news organisations, the FT, the Times, the BBC. I've never worked in one which thinks so meticulously about fairness of treatment of people in the news and impartiality and diversity of opinion. I think that's the real argument. It's the argument that happens at 9 o'clock in the morning around our news conference every day to make sure that. So that's my experience of it. I think that Jeff Jarvis poses, if you like, a more profound question for us than just there's a short-term question that he raises, the shovelware question, and how long are we going to keep taking things that we've essentially made for television or made for papers or made for magazines and repurpose that for a digital screen? And when are we going to start, and I know lots of people have started, but how much are we going to see that the medium is the message? How much are we going to see real changes in the way in which stories are told? That's one piece of it. But the more profound one, and I guess the one that pulls together both the first and second half of your question, is the point that he makes, which is, what about the outcomes? How do we think about journalism as relates to the outcomes? Not the outcomes in terms of how many people are reading or watching or listening to your stories, but do we give people the information they need so that they have an understanding of planning applications or what's happening in their local courts, or equally, on climate change or the Middle East? How do we, and if you like, in a world where everything is increasingly measured, this is a big issue for journalism. To an extent, we haven't required of ourselves to be measured, partly because we couldn't be. Now, standing back from that, what does that mean for the BBC? Look, I said when I was at the Times that I thought the BBC was the best in the world at what it does. So you won't be surprised to hear that I'm a fan of it, and still remain so. I think one of the things that's really interesting is that I suppose, partly to my surprise, when I thought about this seriously and the role of BBC News in the internet age, I came to the conclusion that whilst everything was available, that public service mission was perhaps more needed than ever. And there is a big question about how you want to fund that. There's a question, and there'll be lots of debate around it. My point is, look at the outcome. The outcome is that there are voices heard in the public square, if you like, in the world and in this country, and that's because a set of values that are required of the BBC in the way in which it does its journalism. And personally, I think that's, if anything, more needed than ever. In many ways, it's more exciting to get to do it, but it's more needed than ever. And I think that answers the licence fee question, which is we're going to have to figure out how best to do that so we can keep doing that work and keep making sure that it. On the 8th of May 2015, the day after the general election, 20 million people came to BBC Online to look at results and the outcome of the election. And what was really, and you thought, oh, yeah, well, that 20 million though in this country is really quite a lot. What was really striking to us was that at about 7 o'clock in the morning, around 80% of them were on mobile. So the use of devices is changing. I think there's something that you put your finger on which is sort of, are you right to make an effort on, I see you've got an Apple Watch, right? So why do you try and build an app on the Apple Watch when it comes out? I'm a big believer in you try and get there first. Not because you get it right, you don't, right? But you can really learn as you go. The second part of your question is, does that mean we need to change what we teach? I'd say I've got a lot more to learn from you than I've got to tell you on this. I think this is a really, really complicated one, because I'm trying to say two things, aren't I, in the comments I made. One is that the core skills of journalism, understanding the process, learning how to listen, learning how to think and analyse what you're hearing, reading and learning, understanding where the lines of the law are, understanding how you pursue a story. These things take some serious work and some serious thought, and they're not. It's not to say that they're not changed by new technologies and new platforms. Of course they are, but you've got to do that work. I think we've got a lot to learn. I probably have got much more to learn from you in this room, and we may have more to learn from your students even, in the way in which such stories are told. Because it touches the authenticity point. There's a way of telling stories that grabs the attention, and it's like any, if you like, intellectual or creative endeavour. How you actually not just get the story but then tell it well. So there are two sets of different things. They're the kinds of things that I think all employers look for, particularly in news: curiosity, to my mind a level of cheerfulness, and a commitment to hard work. There's a second set which is around what skills you bring. I think that personally, because I grew up in print, I still care a great deal about how things are written and communicated. So the quality of the storytelling matters a great deal to me. I think if you were looking at someone who had grown up in television, they would equally look at craft skills in television, the quality of the filmmaking. These things, I'm saying the same thing for whether you're in print and television. The quality of your craft in storytelling, I think, really, really matters to people. And then, personally, I think that, I think, by the way, I think that law and ethics matters enormously. Absolutely. I don't expect students who come in, or new recruits, to know it all. Right? What I really want is that people know how important it is, and know to ask when they don't know. And that goes for me too, by the way. You know, it's a constant process. But I guess the real skill is how do you communicate when you walk in for that interview a willingness to learn, combined with an original inquisitiveness. That in the end is it, isn't it? Is the sense of someone who walks in the room and gets the point of journalism, which is we are unbelievably lucky to get to ask the question. It's just an unbelievable privilege, and if you're excited by the work of asking the question, if you can land that makes, I think, a huge difference. And it's sometimes a piece of work that you've done and go, wow, I can't believe someone had the ingenuity to ask that question. That's what sparks